I still remember the weight of her voice, sharp as if the words were meant to cleave me in half. We were in the cramped living room, faded curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. My aunt stood across from me, arms folded in that way she always did when she believed she was declaring something final. Her mouth curled as though she were delivering a fact nobody could argue with. "You'll never amount to anything." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Surely she wouldn't say that to me so plainly, so casually. But the look in her eyes, cold, certain, almost dismissive, confirmed she meant every syllable. The sentence echoed, louder than the sound of traffic outside or the muffled laugh track from the old television in the background. It was strange. A dozen conversations, 100 small scoldings, they all blurred together in memory. Yet that single line carved itself into my chest so deeply that years later, I can still feel the raw sting of it. At first, I tried to hide my reaction, but inside it felt like the ground slid from beneath me. I had been on the receiving end of her sharp remarks before, but this one was different. These weren't just words. They felt like a sentence being handed down, as though my future had already been decided by her contempt. I sat there, frozen, my lips pressing so tightly together they nearly hurt, willing myself not to let a single tear fall. Tears, I knew, would only prove her right in her eyes. Weakness was what she expected. Still, something hot swelled in my chest. Embarrassment, yes. Anger, too. But most of all, a gnawing sense of shame. Shame that maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe I was destined to drift through life without ever proving my worth. Every failure, every unfinished attempt, every awkward stumble suddenly paraded in my memory like proof of her declaration. The worst part was how easily the thought planted itself. What if she's right? Yet beneath the shame, something began to spark. Tiny at first, fragile, but there nonetheless. The stubborn need to push back. That night, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, her words replaying over and over like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them again. Sharp, certain, final. They pressed on me like a weight I couldn't push away. For a while, I believed they would crush me completely. But somewhere in those long, restless hours, the sting turned into something else. It was faint at first, a quiet murmur beneath the noise of doubt. Yet the more I turned her words over in my mind, the more that murmur grew louder. I began to whisper back to myself, not in defiance, not yet, but in a question. What if she's wrong? That thought alone burned like a small flame in the dark. It didn't erase the sting, but it shifted something inside me. For the first time, I wondered if pain could be fuel. If rejection, dismissal, and scorn might all become the very reasons I kept moving forward. Her certainty had planted a seed. But I realized, lying there in the dark, that I had a choice. Let it grow into my defeat, or into my determination. By morning, I knew nothing in my life had changed. And yet, everything had. I still didn't have a clear plan, no secret map to success, no miracle waiting outside my door. What I did have was a wound that refused to close and a quiet fire I hadn't felt before. Every echo of her sentence, "You'll never amount to anything," stopped being just an insult and started becoming a challenge. Of course, I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. There were no dramatic speeches, no triumphant declarations, just a silent promise I made to myself. One day, I will show her, and more importantly, I will show myself. Little did I know then, the path I would take to prove those words wrong would be more unexpected than anything I had ever imagined. A path that would test me, break me, and rebuild me in ways nobody, least of all my aunt, could ever have predicted. And if you've ever been told you're not good enough, or that your dreams are impossible, then this story is also for you. Subscribe now and stay with me, because what comes next might just feel familiar in your own life. Growing up, my family wasn't perfect, but then again, whose is? Still, it often felt like I lived under a spotlight that magnified only my flaws. Where others saw a child just trying to find their way, my aunt seemed to see little more than weaknesses waiting to be confirmed. She carried herself with a stubborn authority, the kind that made her judgments sound less like opinions and more like unshakable truths. Whenever the family gathered in that worn-out kitchen with peeling paint and the smell of overcooked rice lingering in the air, she was quick to remind everyone who belonged and who did not. My cousins, with their polished grades and tidy habits, were her shining examples. Their achievements were paraded like trophies, reinforcing her ideas of what success should look like. I, the awkward, curious one who cared more about sketching in notebooks or taking apart broken radios, rarely made it into her glowing speeches. Instead, I was the afterthought. To her, my interests weren't talents, just distractions. Wasting time, she'd call them. In her eyes, failing a math test wasn't just one test. It was proof in advance that my future had already gone off course. Looking back, it wasn't that she hated me. It was worse. She seemed to look straight through me, unable to imagine I could be capable of anything more than mediocrity. School only deepened the feeling of being the odd one out. While friends boasted about science fairs and top rankings, I found myself captivated by things no one else seemed to value. Scribbling made-up stories in the margins of math notebooks, experimenting with an old secondhand camera, or disappearing into hours of daydreaming about worlds beyond my small neighborhood. Teachers often saw me as distracted, and my aunt never missed a chance to remind the family of every low test score. "This is why you'll end up going nowhere," she'd mutter just within earshot, making sure her words landed with precision. And though part of me longed to argue, another part silently feared she might be right. I tried fitting into her mold once, joining a cousin's study group, attempting to mimic their neat routines, but it felt like I was forcing myself into clothes that didn't belong to me. My mind simply didn't light up over algebra equations the way it did when I was crafting a story, or tinkering with a gadget I'd pulled from a junk pile. At home, this mismatch became another source of scorn. My aunt's laughter whenever I showed enthusiasm for unserious hobbies still echoes today. Those moments cut deeper than I admitted at the time. But even as her words stung, they also became fuel, quietly hardening the part of me that refused to give up what felt natural, even if it wasn't celebrated. As I moved into my late teens, the pressure to find a proper path intensified. My aunt's pronouncements grew more frequent, each one a fresh reminder of my perceived lack of direction. I tried a few conventional routes, a short-lived stint in a retail job that left me feeling hollow, a community college course I quickly dropped, each attempt ending in a quiet, personal failure. These missteps only seemed to validate her predictions. "See," her unspoken gaze would say, "I told you so." It was during this period that my different interests, the ones she dismissed, became my secret refuge. I spent countless hours honing my craft, whether it was writing short stories late into the night, learning basic video editing on an ancient computer, or simply observing people and situations, trying to understand the hidden narratives beneath the surface. These weren't just hobbies. They were the only places I felt truly alive, truly capable. But even in these private moments of passion, her voice would sometimes creep in, whispering doubts. "Who are you to think you can make a living from this? This isn't a real job. You're just wasting time." The internal battle was constant, the quiet joy of creation against the loud echo of her skepticism. It was a lonely fight, fueled by a stubborn belief that there had to be more to my life than what she had decreed. The more I tried to silence her voice in my head, the louder it seemed to grow. And yet, ironically, it was that very noise that pushed me to keep returning to the things she mocked. Maybe I wasn't top of my class, and maybe my path didn't come neatly packaged the way my cousins did, but I had something they didn't, a burning need to prove that my so-called hobbies could matter. Whenever the house grew quiet, I'd sneak back to my notebook, or hunch over the battered old computer humming in the corner. I practiced, failed, and practiced again. I didn't tell anyone what I was creating because part of me feared ridicule, but deep down I also knew I was building something slowly, brick by brick. Looking back, it was those hidden hours that laid the groundwork for everything to come. Without realizing it, I was teaching myself discipline, not the kind found in tidy schedules, but the kind born out of stubbornness, out of refusing to let someone else's certainty define my destiny. Ironically, my aunt's constant criticisms became the unintentional fuel that kept me going. Her words had cut deep, yes, but they also forced me to imagine a future where I wasn't confined by her limited vision. In a strange way, she handed me the challenge of my life, to step beyond the box she had already drawn for me. That challenge, though painful, became the silent foundation for the turning point that would soon follow. The quiet promise I'd made to myself in the dark of my bedroom began to solidify into a fierce resolve. It wasn't enough to just believe she was wrong. I had to show her. And not just her, but everyone who had ever dismissed my unconventional interests. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative. I decided to fully commit to my passion, the one she called a waste of time. It was a terrifying leap. I had no safety net, no clear path, and certainly no encouragement from the people who mattered most. The first step was the hardest, telling myself, this is it. I'm going all in. But the world doesn't just hand out success because you've decided to pursue a dream. The moment I truly committed, the challenges seemed to multiply. Friends, well-meaning but conventional, would raise eyebrows. "Are you sure about this? It's a tough field." Their skepticism, though softer than my aunt's, still pricked at my confidence. Then came the financial strain. Pursuing my passion meant less time for stable, if unfulfilling jobs. There were weeks when every penny counted, when the choice between a new piece of equipment for my craft and a decent meal felt like a genuine dilemma. The hunger for success often felt more potent than the hunger in my stomach. The mockery wasn't always direct, but it was constant. Family gatherings became minefields of thinly veiled jabs. "Still playing with your little projects?" my aunt would ask, her tone dripping with feigned concern. Other relatives would offer unsolicited advice, always steering me towards sensible careers, as if my chosen path was a childish phase I needed to outgrow. Each dismissive comment, each patronizing smile, felt like a small cut. It was easy to pretend it didn't bother me, to put on a brave face, but alone, those words would echo, feeding the self-doubt that was always lurking. I started to question my own judgment. Was I being naive? Was this all just a foolish pursuit? My early attempts at creating something meaningful often ended in disappointment. I poured hours into projects that went nowhere, stories that never found an audience, videos that garnered only a handful of views. Each failed endeavor felt like another piece of evidence for my aunt's case against me. The sting of rejection was sharp, but the sting of internalizing her voice was even worse. There were moments I wanted to throw everything away, to surrender to the path of least resistance, to just get a normal job, settle for stability, and silence the critics by conforming. But then I'd remember the look in her eyes, the certainty in her voice, and a stubborn refusal would rise within me. I couldn't give up. Not yet. There were nights when the silence of my room felt heavier than any criticism. I'd stare at a blank screen or an unfinished notebook, the quiet taunting me louder than words ever could. That's when her voice would creep back in, sharp and steady. "You'll never amount to anything." It wasn't just her voice anymore. It had become my own internal refrain. I wrestled with it constantly. One small mistake, one failed upload, one rejection email, and suddenly I'd hear that phrase echoing like an accusation. It made me hesitate. It made me second-guess myself. Sometimes it nearly broke me. But in those low points, I learned something unexpected. Determination is often born out of despair. When you feel like you've already lost, there's a strange kind of freedom in deciding to keep going anyway. I began to shift my mindset. If I was going to fail, then I'd fail trying. If I was going to stumble, then I'd stumble moving forward. Slowly, that stubborn resolve began to outweigh the doubt. Each attempt, whether successful or not, became proof that I hadn't given in. Every late night, every sacrifice, every ounce of energy poured into my craft was my unspoken rebellion against the future my aunt had already written for me. And though I still had nothing to show the world, deep down, I sensed a shift was coming. A fragile but unshakable feeling that persistence, no matter how messy, might finally pay off. The pressure kept building, like a storm gathering strength. Each month felt like a tightrope walk, balancing day jobs, shaving off hours for my real passion, and somehow trying to prove to myself that all the sacrifices weren't in vain. Friends drifted away. They couldn't understand why I poured so much energy into something that hadn't produced results. To them, it looked like stubbornness. To me, it was survival. The truth? I was exhausted, not just tired from sleepless nights and endless work, but weary from carrying doubt like a shadow everywhere I went. There were mornings when I wanted nothing more than to stay in bed and surrender. Still, each time I thought about quitting, I heard her voice again, proclaiming my inevitable failure. Oddly enough, that voice, meant to crush me, kept me from putting the dream down for good. If I quit, she'd be right. And I couldn't stomach giving her that satisfaction. So I pushed harder. I learned to stretch every resource, to squeeze creativity out of limitations. I experimented, failed, adjusted, and tried again. Every struggle stacked on top of the last, until it felt like a wall looming over me. And yet, behind that wall, I began to sense something stirring. For the first time, cracks were forming. Not in me, but in the certainty of her judgment. The relentless grind was leading somewhere. I couldn't see the full picture yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The breakthrough was no longer a distant dream. It was approaching, step by step, with all the inevitability of the sunrise. It didn't happen all at once. Success rarely does. It started with something small, almost invisible to anyone else, but to me it felt monumental. After years of pouring my heart into work that no one seemed to see, one of my creations, something I nearly abandoned out of frustration, caught someone's attention. A kind comment, a share, a message from a stranger who said, "This really spoke to me." It was just one person, but in that moment, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, I felt seen. That single spark ignited a chain reaction. I leaned into what had resonated, refining my craft with dogged persistence. Soon, that one comment became a handful, then dozens. My notebook began filling with fresh ideas. My late nights no longer felt like a burden, but like a calling. Every hour spent in the shadows was finally pushing me towards something brighter. It wasn't about recognition yet. It was about proof. Proof that I wasn't shouting into an empty void. Proof that maybe, just maybe, the voice that had haunted me all these years was wrong. If you've ever had even one small sign that your dream might be worth chasing, hold on to it. Drop a comment about your spark. It might inspire someone else reading this today. The next turning point came unexpectedly, disguised as something small. I remember refreshing my screen one morning and noticing a jump. Not hundreds of views, but enough to make me sit up straight. For the first time, a few hundred pairs of eyes had landed on my work. To most people, it might not have meant much, but to me, it felt like the universe whispering, "Keep going." Then came the first real paycheck. It wasn't a fortune. In fact, it barely covered groceries. But when I held that slip of paper, I couldn't stop trembling. It wasn't about the money, it was what it represented. My so-called waste of time had produced something tangible. It was validation carved out of late nights, empty pockets, and the stubborn refusal to stop. The ripple effect grew stronger. Comments from strangers turned into messages of gratitude. People shared how my work had made them laugh, think, or simply feel less alone. The dream that everyone dismissed was now touching lives I'd never even met. It was surreal. Surreal and electrifying. What once felt like shouting into a void had become a conversation, a connection. And in that connection, I discovered something more valuable than proving anyone wrong. The joy of lifting someone else up with the very thing I was told would amount to nothing. If you've ever had even the smallest win, your first project, your first paycheck, your first compliment, pause and honor it. Hit the like button if you're proud of how far you've come, no matter the size of your first victory. Once the door cracked open, the momentum built faster than I ever imagined. Every small win pushed me to refine my work even more. Better equipment when I could afford it, sharper storytelling, discipline that grew stronger with every attempt. Suddenly, the projects that once sat in silence began drawing real attention. A video would circulate beyond my circle of friends. A story would be reposted by people I'd never spoken to. Each milestone, though modest at first, stacked upon the last like bricks, forming a sturdy foundation. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The first time my work truly went viral. Notifications flooded in so quickly I couldn't keep up. Comments piled up by the hundreds, thousands, voices from all over the world chiming in. Some laughed, some cried, many simply said, "This was exactly what I needed today." I sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed. For so long, I had chased approval from a single voice in my family, yet here I was, connecting with strangers across continents. That's when I realized success wasn't a fantasy anymore, it was real. The recognition snowballed into opportunities I never expected. Collaborations, invitations, even the first taste of what real financial stability felt like. But more importantly, it gave me undeniable evidence that my passion had value. Have you ever had that moment, the one breakthrough that changed everything? Share your answer in the comments below, because your story might just motivate someone else to hold on a little longer. Success looks glamorous from the outside, but for me, the most powerful change happened on the inside. For the first time, I felt a quiet confidence blooming where doubt used to live. The voice that once hounded me, the one repeating, "You'll never amount to anything," began to fade into the background. It didn't disappear completely, but it no longer dictated my every move. Instead, it was replaced by something sturdier: belief. Not the loud kind that boasts, but the steady kind that carries you through long nights and heavy work. I woke up with purpose. I stayed up late, not out of frustration, but because my ideas pulled me forward. The shift was startling. Where I once dreaded failure, I now welcomed the challenge, because each risk carried the possibility of growth. And with every milestone reached, my shoulders felt lighter, as though a lifetime of weight was being lifted, piece by piece. Perhaps the greatest revelation was this: success wasn't about applause or numbers. It wasn't even about proving my aunt wrong. It was about realizing I had built something with my own hands, against all odds, and that no one could take that away from me. I started to see the truth. Her words could only define my future if I allowed them to. And for the first time, I understood that I never really needed her approval to succeed. It was almost surreal how the moment arrived. After years of working in silence, of pushing forward while carrying her words like a weight, my success had grown too visible to ignore. Family chatter, once dominated by my cousin's achievements, now occasionally shifted toward me. My projects, my growth, the strange fact that the dreamer had made something real. These details leaked into conversations. Eventually, they reached my aunt. Her reaction came not through a speech but through a look. We were seated again in that same living room where years earlier her words had carved into me. This time, though, the roles felt reversed. I carried myself differently now, not boastful, but grounded in quiet pride. When she asked almost casually how it was all going, I explained without embellishment. I told her about the projects, the recognition, the impact my work was having. For the first time I can ever remember, she didn't have a quick remark. Her eyes flickered, searching for a response. But nothing came. That silence was louder to me than her original sentence ever had been. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but it was the absence of dismissal. And in that absence, I felt something I had chased for so long: freedom from her judgment. She never apologized. Not in words, at least. My aunt wasn't the type to admit she might have been wrong. Instead, her reaction hovered somewhere between skepticism and hesitant recognition. She asked a few polite questions, nodded at my answers, and then changed the subject. To anyone else, it may have looked like nothing, but for me, it revealed everything. I realized, in that moment, that I no longer needed her to acknowledge my worth. For years, I had been waiting, craving for her approval, as though her validation was the missing piece of my identity. But now, sitting across from her, watching her avoid the truth that was unfolding right in front of her, I finally understood. My success didn't require her permission. Oddly enough, there was no anger in me anymore. Only peace. The very journey her words had pushed me into had also freed me from the need for them. Whether she chose to support me or dismiss me no longer mattered. I had proven something, not to her, but to myself. And in that subtle, anticlimactic exchange, I found the resolution I didn't know I was searching for. It wasn't victory in the way I once imagined. It was far greater. It was the knowledge that no one could define my future but me. Looking back now, I can smile at the irony. The very words that once felt like a curse shaped me into who I am today. They hurt, yes, they haunted me. But they also forced me to dig deeper, to fight harder, and to discover a version of myself I wouldn't have met otherwise. I used to believe success was about proving her wrong. But the truth is, that was never the real prize. The real victory was proving myself right, discovering that my worth was never hers to measure, never hers to limit. Every failure, every stumble, every late night led me here, to a life I built from resilience and persistence. When I hear her voice in my memory now, it no longer stings. Instead, it reminds me of how far I've come. And perhaps, in a strange way, I owe part of my strength to that moment in the living room, when she declared my fate. She was wrong. But more than that, I chose not to let her words define me. So here's the message for you. No one has the right to declare who you can or cannot become. Only you get to write that story. If this journey inspired you, hit subscribe and join me here. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters, their dream matters, and their worth is never dictated by doubt. Together we'll rise above every "you'll never make it." I still remember the